Everybody, this is Dream, and today we got an 8-game college basketball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I will also do NBA at the end of the video. It's only a 2-game slate over there, so that'll be pretty quick. But let's get into this college basketball slate. We have a lot of injury report on this one. For Florida Atlantic, Boyd is questionable. For Michigan State, Walker, Hall, and Kohler are questionable. For Georgia, Deloach is questionable. For UConn, Klingon, Spencer, and Caravan are questionable. For Seton Hall, Hutchins, Everett is questionable, and for for Indiana, Xavier Johnson is questionable. All these games have pretty tight games, with the exception of the Baylor game being an 11.5 point spread, and all the games are within 142 to 150 total points, with the exception of the Wisconsin-Michigan State game, which is only 131 points. So overall, interesting slate. We have a good options across the board, but let's go and get into this one. For FAU and Illinois, this game has a 2.5 point spread in favor of FAU. I kind of feel like this game could be a little bit lower than the 148 total, as both these teams have decent defenses, and Illinois does sometimes struggle offensively. But both these teams do have potential both directions, so I think it's probably going to be a mid-level scoring game. As for FAU, Greenlee has some potential in this game, though he does carry some risk here. If Boyd doesn't play, he would definitely become a pretty interesting play. If Boyd does play, then Boyd would definitely be in play on the slate, as he's done pretty well. He's only played a couple games, though, and he could be on a minutes limit, so that would be a risk, but he definitely has some potential. Both these guys are somewhat avoidable on the slate, but they do have a little bit of potential in this matchup. As for Illinois, Terrence Shannon is really the only guy that has any upside at all, though he does have quite a bit of upside, as his floor is a little bit lower than I like at this price point, but he does carry some upside in this matchup. Even though it is a pretty tight fantasy point game, he should have some potential to have a good, solid outing. Looking at Villanova and Kansas State, this game has a 142 total. Villanova is favored to win the game by 2 points. Kansas State has been decent defensively and offensively this season, but they haven't played anybody particularly well. Nova has been pretty average on the season, and Villanova, quite frankly, is a very avoidable team on this one. It felt like everybody's pretty not priced very well, and also they just don't do a lot, and they seem to go pretty deep in their bench this season. As for Kansas State, this is where it gets a little bit interesting here. There is a potential stack between Carter, Perry, and Kaluma, and they all have some potential in this matchup. I like Kaluma the best, Carter the third, and Perry the second best, as they all have some upside, but they do carry some risk. And obviously Carter is the most expensive, Perry second, and Kaluma is third, but Kaluma has the most upside on this of this three, though all three of them have pretty much the same range of 24 to 26 fantasy points on the low end to 38 to 45 on the high end. So I do think there's some viability for that stack, but it does carry some risk, and Kaluma would be the one-off if you just want to use one guy from that game. Looking at Providence and Oklahoma, this game does carry some good options. However, both teams are pretty decent average scoring teams, and then both teams a little bit worse defensively than some of the other teams available, but I do think this game will be pretty close, and the scoring total 144 is right on par of where I think it'll be. Oklahoma is actually favored to win this game, and they definitely have the potential, but there is some risk here. Providence is a little bit weaker defensively than Oklahoma is. Looking at Providence, we do like Hopkins and Pierre the best on this team. Now, Pierre definitely seems like he's the best option, though he does have a low floor. He's played decently well so far this season, and he does carry some upside in this matchup. And then Hopkins does have some potential in this one, though he's priced pretty high. He has a high ceiling, but he does have a lower floor that I like at the price point. So they both definitely have some potential, but Oklahoma does carry some, potential risk here, as they are decently defensively, and Providence does have some difficulty sometimes, and Oklahoma is favored to win the game. If you want to go with the Oklahoma stack, there's definitely a way to do it, and McCollum, Owa, Hewley, and Uzan. Now, these four guys are going to play, most of the minutes here, though they do get some guys off the bench here, and Hewley only plays 20 minutes a game. But they all carry some upside here, but they are overpriced. But this is a stack you could go if you think Oklahoma is going to win this game pretty handily, then those 4 guys are definitely all in play. Then we're going to look at Wisconsin and Michigan State here. Now, this game definitely has some potential, even though it's only the 131 total points. Michigan State is favored by 5.5 points, but there are some injuries here that could definitely muddle this game up. The good news is this game starts at 7, so we may have the information before the slate locks about Michigan State's players. But honestly, it's going to be hard to figure that out beforehand. The only guy for Wisconsin that really looks good at all is Crowell, and he looks like a really solid play on the slate, though he is slightly overpriced. I do like him quite a bit for the slate, so he's definitely in play. Really not much else to like from Wisconsin, as Michigan State will look to slow this game down, as will Wisconsin for that matter. As we look at Michigan State, Holloman, if he does draw the start, he would be a viable option on the slate, but he definitely carries a lot of high risk. He started 2 games, and both games he scored over 20 fantasy points. The problem is on the other games he didn't do much anything, so he definitely carries a lot of risk, but he is in play. With all the questionable tags here, Walker does seem like he might play today, but he definitely doesn't have a lot of upside in this matchup. And then Hall is coming off the flu, which he probably will play, but he probably will be limited as well. And they also are going pretty deep in their bench so far this season, so they're pretty avoidable. Looking at Georgia Tech and Georgia, now DeLuch is questionable, and he is not really fantasy relevant, so it's not a big deal. He only plays 18 minutes a game anyway, so he's pretty avoidable. Looking at Georgia Tech, there really isn't a ton to like here. Kelly does have some potential given the scoring, and he is capable here, but he definitely carries a lot of risk in this matchup. Even though it's a high total at 146, both these offenses are pretty lethargic, and both defenses aren't great either. I do think Georgia's a slightly better team, so that definitely kind of pushes me off of Kelly. Looking at Georgia, if I had to pick somebody, it would be Noah Thompson, but he has a low floor, though he does have a decent matchup here, and obviously the defense of Georgia Tech gives him some potential, though he does carry some risk in this one. Not a lot to like from that game. Looking at UNC and UConn, this game also carries some potential problems, as we do have 3 questionable tags for UConn, and Spencer Caravan and Klingon. Now, all these 3 are game time decisions, as according to their coach, and so they are going to carry some risk here. As for UNC, there is a risky stack here with RJ Davis, Baycott, and Ingram. I think I like Ingram the most, but Baycott and RJ Davis do have some potential. If you think UConn and North Carolina get into a shooting match, then that would definitely be a couple guys to look at. But both these teams have played a pretty tough schedule, and both have decent defense. But if we look at UConn, I do like UConn quite a bit here, especially with Newton. He's played very well this season. He has really good upside. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. I think he's got a lot of potential to have a huge game, though he's going to have some potential issue with some of the defensive players on UConn, but he's definitely a great play on the slate, so he is a core play for me. As for the other plays, all 3 of the other guys are game time decisions. If they all play, or if Caravan plays, then he would definitely be in play on the slate. He does carry some risks, though, and we don't really know what the injury situation is going to be like here, as all 3 guys are game time decisions. Now, Caravan, if he plays, he'll be the only guy that I really take a look at. The other guys are pretty avoidable, but you could do a potential stack with Spencer and Klingon, too. They just are pretty overpriced here for this matchup. Looking at Seton Hall and Baylor, now this slate features a pretty decent total with 150 points. Baylor is favored to win the game by 11 points, and one of Seton Hall's players is game time decision here, though he had a concussion, so he may not play a full complement of minutes. He's not really that fantasy relevant anyway, and quite frankly, Seton Hall looks pretty avoidable on this one, as Baylor has a pretty decent defense and a high-scoring offense that could get out of hand early. If that's the case for Baylor, they do have some capable options here, Dennis being the best one. The problem with this team is everybody's extremely overpriced, and a lot of these guys score the ball well, but they don't do a lot of other fantasy stuff, and they do have pretty deep bench as they have 6 guys over 9 total points, but nobody over 14 points a game. So that really does limit their upside from a fantasy perspective, especially when they're in $7,000 to $8,000 ranges. They're a team that you could stack for the scoring aspect, but it does really carry some risk here, and I think it's relatively avoidable. Looking at Indiana and Michigan, this game does carry a pretty decent ceiling at 145 total points. Michigan is favored by 7.5 points, and Xavier Johnson for Indiana is a game time decision. Now, both these teams have had some ups and downs already this season. I do expect Indiana to not play particularly well against Michigan, who is a better team, but as has played a tougher schedule than Indiana, and are both teams being pretty average offensively. It's not a whole lot to like in this game as everybody's somewhat overpriced. Ware does have some limited potential for Indiana, but he definitely carries some risk with his price being so high. And I thought I was going to like Michigan quite a bit on the slate, but the price is way high for the potential here, and so they're pretty avoidable. Even though Burnett, McDaniel, and Nakamoto play a lot of minutes, they definitely carry some risk on the slate with their prices and the lack of their fantasy relevancy. It's definitely a 3-player stack you could go with, but high risk, high reward there. Overall, this slate does carry a lot of risk. It definitely didn't see too many guys jumping off the page at me, but Newton and Shannon are probably my 2 favorite players on this entire slate, as they have the most upside on in their 2 games. However, they are pretty pricey, so that's going to be hard to, as there's not a ton of value. Even though there's a few guys mixed in, we do have a lot of questionable tags, which we could get some information about. Hopefully, they could give us a potential upside in some other guys, but really, there's a lot of risk on this slate, and it's going to be tough on this, in general here. Looking at the NBA slate here, we have a nice little 2-game slate featuring the Knicks and the Bucks and the Suns and the Lakers, and both these games have a 228 total points, and both these games are within a few points spread. Milwaukee is favored by 5, and the Lakers favored by 2. With the injury report, Crowder and Connaughton are out for the Bucks. For the Suns, Gordon is questionable and Beal is out, and for the Lakers, LeBron is questionable and Vincent is out. Now, the Lakers do get back Hachimura and some other guys, so if LeBron was to miss, he would definitely get a boost here, but really, we just have 4 guys that we really want to start with, and one of them being Julius Randle. He's played very well the last few games, and he tends to be streaky, but when he gets going, he tends to go well. I like his potential in this game, and so he is a core player right now. That could subject to change depending on what we get injury news for other teams. Looking at D'Angelo Russell, he also has some upside as he's played pretty well lately. His price has stayed up high, though, and if LeBron were to miss, he would become a core play, but right now he's a decent play. Jalen Brunson, also in play for the Knicks. He's played very well lately, and I do like his upside. He has, as much upside as anybody on the slate, and he's not over $9,000, which is nice. And then Nurkic has some utility on the slate. Now, he's been up and down throughout the season, but right now he's playing pretty well, and he faces a pretty good matchup against a weak defense, which gives him a lot of potential here, and so he is a core play as well. Outside of that, we're going to have to wait and see about Eric Gordon. That could open up some guys like on Phoenix, excuse me, my brain, Okiogi for Phoenix, but there definitely carries a lot of risk there. So we'll have to wait and see about the injury report. But overall, it's a pretty interesting slate, obviously pretty small. If you have any comments or questions about either of the slates, feel free to leave them below. Make sure to drop a comment with your favorite players on these slates, and have a nice day, guys.